I grew up in a working class estate. My dad was a labourer. My mum was a housewife with part-time jobs. Fairly typical, hard-working, working-class family, yeah.
That great story you told before we heard the first record about your mother saying, using the fact that you'd given away one of the records that were in fact yours. I mean, to any mother, that just sounds like the most brilliant technique. But she obviously had a fair idea of how to keep you in line. She was quite a strong woman, wasn't she?
Yeah, I think normal mothers would have said, God's watching you, but I was already an atheist by the age of 10. It was funny because I was about 8 or 9 years old, and I used to go to Sunday school, and I believed in God, of course, And I remember once I was doing a drawing from the Bible, and my older brother came in, Bob, and went, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm just doing Jesus." He went, "Well, why do you believe in God?" And my mum went, "Bob." And I knew he had something to tell me, and she didn't want him to. So
how did that sit with your mother? I mean, if she had felt that it was important for you to go to Sunday school, presumably she was religious.
Well, not really. I think it was, to a hard-working, working-class mother, Jesus and God were cheap babysitters. If I'm not watching you, they are. And it just helps them out around the home.
And for you were saying that you were fascinated by science as a wee boy, so facts were the thing for you. That could be proven. You were quite a sensible boy.
Well, yes, I wasn't a bad boy. I didn't used to, pull frogs apart and set fire to buildings. I was cheeky. I answered back. So the biggest chance of me getting into trouble was acting cleverer than the teacher. That was the high risk for me. But yeah, I absolutely was fascinated with science and nature. I always knew I'd go to university. I wanted to study science. I was a keen sort of scientist, and I was in awe of the world. I was just absolutely in awe of the world.
Wise. Tell me then, Ricky Gervais, was there a sort of family sense of humour? I mean, I know you didn't want to overplay the idea of sort of poverty, and we didn't have much, but one of the things that can bind working class families together especially is a lot of laughs.
That was the most important thing. Outside having a job, you had to have a job. Doesn't matter what you earned, but you had to have a job. If you had a job, you were allowed to have a laugh. That was what it was all about.
Was there a sense of competitiveness in the humour? I mean, did somebody always want to be the one who got the last line in?
Yeah, but you respected if you had a go. If you crumbled, you'd lost. And if you came out with a good one, it could be devastating, but they'd have to laugh. It was an engagement, and you'd shake hands afterwards and go, "Good one."
Who set the tone for that? Was it your father?
No, my father was very dry. He said, one thing a day. But I suppose my next oldest brother, Bob, was the one that instigated most things. He was he just said funny things, there's nowhere he wouldn't go.
What about boundaries? Because between people who know each other very well, of course, you can go where people don't normally go, people you don't know as well. You can just take the humour to places that might be considered a bit risky.
Well, when my mum died, we were organising the funeral, and the vicar said to my brother, "So tell me about your mother. What was she like?" And my brother, just winding up the vicar, said, "She was a keen racist." And the vicar said, "Well, I can't say that." He went, "Oh, okay, then she liked gardening." And then when we were at the funeral, so there's me, my brother Bob, my sister Marcia, and our oldest brother, Larry, who'd come down from Scotland. But my brother had played a trick on him as well, because the vicar suddenly goes, "Ava leaves behind 4 loving children, Ricky, Bob, Marcia, and Barry." And Larry just turns around and looks, and we're crying with laughter. And the vicar thinks we're crazy, that we're there crying and crying with laughter.
But apart from, there is a question about whether or not, of course, we use humour as a reflex to protect us from things, and where more than a funeral are you going to feel the pain of a parent dying. But also, for me, I find those very funny stories. For a lot of people, though, you've strayed into the bounds of absolute tastelessness and disrespect.
But definitely not. But absolutely...
definitely not, because everybody is participating.
And everyone, knew what they thought of Mum, and we were worried about what the vicar thought.
Right.
I remember, I think it was at my dad's funeral where we're mucking around and laughing, and Bob had to go over to the vicar and say, "Sorry about that." He said, he was 83. If he was 50, there'd have been less laughter. And that sums it up. He'd had a good life, and it was exactly what they would have wanted, I think.
the stuff that you were saying about your mother's funeral, though, there's very much a sense in which that reflects the idea that there is nowhere you won't go for laugh. I mean, is that for you also a professional dictum, that wherever you think you will make people smile, that is where you're willing to travel for a joke or a good line?
Well, yes, but you've got to be, I wouldn't do it at someone else's mum's funeral. I think that's the difference. But I don't think there's any taboos in humour. It's where the humour comes from. Humour comes from a good or a bad place.
So context is all.
Of course.